Ladies and gentlemen, my name is John O'Sullivan. I'm the president of the Danube Institute, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the latest version of the Free Market Roadshow. We have now been working with the Free Market Roadshow, which is an organization that takes the message of classical liberal economics and modern economics to the rest of the world by literally taking the show on the road. It is rather like, I won't say a circus, but one of those successful Broadway productions that then has a second life touring the provinces. Well, I don't say the rest of the world is the provinces, but the rest of the world badly needs what the Free Market Roadshow is going to offer, and offer here today, but also in a great number of other cities around the world and other institutions around the world. So we at the Danube Institute are both flattered and grateful for the opportunity to work with Barbara Culm and with the other members of the Free Market Roadshow who are, so to speak, we contribute our own people, and they contribute a lot of other distinguished minds connected with institutions like the Liberty Fund, it was talking about it a moment ago, the Mont Pelerin Society and others. Now, we have today an odd situation in the world, which is to say, we have rarely been so well informed about the practical impact of economic policies in history. We forgot a lot of things by the end of the Second World War about how economies worked. We had a long period in which socialist ideas were absolutely the dominant force in Western civilization, and therefore throughout the world, because the West was then extraordinarily influential. Those ideas, as it turned out, produced the economic crises of the 1970s. And in the 70s, we really learned what didn't work. That's almost more important than learning what does, in a way, because when you know what doesn't work, you're protected from error. Well, we learned what didn't work, and then in the 80s, we learned what did. And that produced 30 years of economic prosperity. Now, not everything we did was correct, because in the nature of things, life is a matter of hypotheses being tested against reality, and when they prove not to work, moving on. Well, it's a progressive process, not in the current sense of the word progressive, but in the real sense. And we have been learning it. And yet, we now see in Washington and London and other cities, we see a regress from the knowledge the things that we know don't work, and the things that we know do work. We seem to have forgotten many of these things. And it's our job here today, and we have an extremely distinguished group of lecturers and debaters to re-establish the truths we are beginning to forget again. I think to forget is one thing. It's a bad thing. But to continue to forget, that's the worst thing of all. And we can't allow that to happen. So I will take myself off the stage. I will invite John Prout to introduce all of our lecturers and debaters today, and I will settle back to enjoy it myself. But thank you I want to thank all of the people taking part today. I want to thank people who helped to organize this, and I want to thank Barbara Culm also for inspiring it. So if I can ask John to take over and introduce everybody, and we will go from there. Thank you very much.
And happy birthday again, John. So someone asked me, what's this afternoon going to be about? And I was looking at the Free Market Roadshow website, and the best description was done by Dr. Barbara Combe. She said there's no need to describe the many problems and crises of our time, but there's a great need to look at the causes and to refute the politicization of explanations and so forth. And only once we know what the problems are and how they arose, then we could come up with some solutions. So we're very fortunate today to have the Danube being able to bring together a group of experts that's going to follow Dr. Combe's lead. And thank you, Melissa and John, for providing us with this opportunity. Our program format is as follows. We will have 2 presentations by 2 speakers, followed by a group discussion in 2 parts. The first presentation, entitled Decaffeinated Democracy, Right to Information and Right to Privacy, is given by Dr. Carlos Puente. He's an economist, lawyer, political scientist, and an accomplished Spanish diplomat who's been posted in numerous places in Asia, America, and Europe, and in particular in Brussels and in Moscow. Lecturer at numerous universities and a political commentator on television and radio. His current focus is on the Central and Eastern Europe. The second presentation is going to be given by Dr. Neven Vidakovic. I just learned how to pronounce that. And it's entitled Structural Inflation, Free Market versus Bureaucracy. And Dr. Neven is CEO of a consulting trading firm called Loti Trading, based in Croatia. He's an adjunct associate professor at the University of Maribor. And interestingly enough, his extensive experience with relation to the topics we're going to discuss today is that he started out in Chicago as a derivatives trader. And then when he moved back to Europe, he continued at Inter San Paulo Bank in the risk management area. The group discussions that's going to follow these 2 speakers. The first session, we're going to basically discuss what are considered the pressing issues that our speakers here will bring up and analyze their root causes. We'll cover a broad range of topics. I imagine all of them are going to be interrelated. So if we're looking like we're moving from one to another, that's unfortunately the reality when you talk about macroeconomics. But we will start with what I think is a good base, which is the post-GFC era, the post-financial crisis of 2008, and how that was the root cause of the low interest rates. Probably better said is Warren Buffett, who said, only when the tide goes out will you figure out who's been swimming naked. The second session, hopefully, will come up with some solutions to the challenges that we'll have discussed in the first session. Now let me introduce you to the speakers for our group. From the United States, we have our Silicon Valley expert, John Chisholm, San Francisco-based, MIT and Harvard graduate. John's career spans 4 decades across the technology space as entrepreneur, investor, and CEO. From working at firms such as General Electric, Hewlett-Packard, and Xerox, he moved on to found companies that were bought by some of the well-known names such as Google and Focus Vision. At his firm, John Chisholm Ventures, he has been investing, I believe, since 1982 in a number of high-tech companies. So we look forward to hearing your perspective of the tech industry. From the heartland of America, Indiana, the Midwest, we have Terry Anker, chairman of Anker Consulting Group, whose company guides small businesses on the formation, startup, capital acquisition from both public and private sources. With his extensive business experiences, Terry, particularly with the mezzanine bank, I think that's going to be something we'll be asking you on, how small businesses are being affected by these high interest rates. Small businesses in America account for 30 million firms and over half the working population. So it's a major critical force for US economic growth. We then have two Washington insiders, Lawson Bader. Lawson is the first. Lawson is the CEO of Donor Trust and Donor Fund, a public charity and donor-advised fund that is formed to safeguard the interests of those people who donate and have their intentions respected. And those donors are those people who have who believe in limited government and reduction of government encroachment, if you will, which makes Lawson the perfect person for that because his previous job was focused on reducing executive overreach. And I believe that was at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. And then before that, at George Mason University, where I hadn't even realized this, there was something called the Capitol Hill, what is it called? Campus. And it's actually very important because its purpose is to educate, give economic education to congressional staffers. And having lived in Washington myself for 5 years, I can tell you the knowledge of economics in Washington, D.C. is highly limited. Our second insider, which will come on later this afternoon, is John Fund. He'll be on Zoom. John is a national affairs columnist for the National Review magazine and Fox News contributor based out of D.C. Previously, he was 27 years at the Wall Street Journal, so he is the go-to guy for the Beltway inside news. So now I would like to welcome our first presentation, Dr. Puente. Please welcome Dr.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much to Free Market Show, to Danube Institute, and all of you for this warm welcome. Thank you, all of you, for coming to this event. Well, I have a short presentation. I suppose that it works in now, okay? So I will pass the first slides. Well, I will tackle this topic with a different point of view that usually, well, you have heard about it. We are living in a very unstable world, and I will not go deep inside of this point because this is the environment that I really want to show what we are, where we are. So this is, well, in fact, an introduction how was the global framework as an environment, mainly from the crisis of 2008 associated with the real estate crash. But anyway, all of you are familiar with all these events, how the economists from the central administrations took some decisions. Most of them were wrong. And also some central banks that they take some decisions that are not very substantial with the real situation to go to solve the problems. Well, now we are involved, right deep in a situation completely different to the past 5 years. And I always remember what von Mises wrote. All these people taking decision have sold their souls to the devil of this money, and this is the result where we are involved right now. So finally, the new world is changing in the opposite way that we were only a few years ago. And if we were shocked because of the situation, it was very dangerous due to negative interest rates, even that everyone go to the bank and well, bankers said, well, please don't open the door. We receive money for free from Frankfurt, so we don't need your money. So this is not a way to treat the investors and people who really want to make business. So, well, the consequences of this situation completely changed from the previous period is that, well, the lower interest rate on bonds and, well, costs were we increased, and the situation right only months ago is that, well, some bank failures in the United States, in Europe as well. And this is, I said at the beginning, is not the topic I really want to talk about it. I really call your attention of some situation that is really a danger. Is a danger for the economy, the free economy, and most people don't realize that, well, the situation must be different if you really want to face the real problems that we have to face in the coming years. Well, of course, well, the restrictions on individual rights. Well, everyone who is watching TV and reading a newspaper will see that most decisions are taken by those organizations that they never have been go to elections. So this is a very unfair situation because it's a contradictory principle with the principle of democracy. As John Sullivan, I remember also, he said, well, I reproduced your, and I mentioned here what you said about it, and I think he's completely right about it. So some wrong monetary policies taken were affecting also the rights, the individual rights, and also the liberties in general. Many governments have adopted new policies concerning property and also freedom. And well, all of us, we own a car. Now you know that in in different countries, well, you cannot use those cars anymore in the center of the town. So what can I do with my car if I can also go around my house? So this is incredible what is happening. And this affects also my property. Why I pay taxes when I bought the car and I cannot use it? And every year also I have to. So this is a violation of individual rights. But also, the same, the European Commission is doing the same, and nobody is confronting this decision taken by an institution that has not been chosen by elections. Even when you go to buy some goods, well, you are not allowed to pay more than 1,000, for instance, in Spain. Well, in some other countries, they're limited 5,000 or 3,000, it depends on, but well, fiat money was invented, right, to use it at least. So, and they don't want really us to pay in cash. And well, the traffic, as I mentioned before, of in low emission areas. Now, in some countries, well, they are trying to sue the government because this limitation is not illegal. And what is happening is that finally, what it affects the situation, the market economy, is that taxes, which we pay for everything, and we pay for the cars we use, and they don't remove it. And so there is a huge contradiction. So, well, now we will see what is the problems, how government frighten us with some limitation to our private property. of course, there are some declarations that they support our rights. For instance, the United Nations, if you consult Article 17 of the Declaration of Human Rights, you will check how the first is everyone has a right to own property, and so it's a legal support for you, for all of us, to have our own properties, and no one can arbitrarily deprive of the property. And this is unfortunately what is happening in some countries, for instance, in Spain. Well, also at the level of the European Union, there are is also the same article. Both, there is not a mistake. Both is the same. Is written, but rights are written the same articles, and so everyone has the right to own, use, and dispose, and because his or her legally acquired possession. So I can do whatever I want with my properties. Well, the real fact is that your rights are limited, and if you read all these declarations, not only in national constitution, but also in the European Union, is declare that all member states should be responsible market economy. If you don't have a member state has not a market economy, cannot be joined the European Union. And later on, even the European Commission is fighting our rights. So this is what I really want to point out about this. What is in fact problems, and to make some restrictions to the market economy. I would like to underline a very special point that maybe most of you are not familiar with, and this is the housing occupancy, because this is happening only in a very few countries. That means that, well, if you go, you own a property, you own an apartment, and you go to buy bread, somebody can enter into your house and you lose your property. So it's happening. It's a joke. No, but it's the real thing what is happening in Spain, also in France. But now the French government has changed completely the legislation. In Spain, this is a huge problem because we have a social communist government, and just recently they reached an agreement with other groups, and they will protect more and more all these squatter people than the real owner. So this is incredible what is happening. They violate the rights, they violate the economy market, they don't respect what is written in the Spanish Constitution. So this is one of the main problems happening that I am familiar with, and that's why I try to inform about this problem that affects our rights. And the second topic is that, well, now it's because of the Ukrainian war, the Russian invasion, it's illegal to expropriate some properties that belong to some Russian citizens. Well, we can talk about this topic. And, well, the second step of my presentation is what is the right we have to receive and also impart information. We have the right of getting information via any media. So government should respect this. And even once again, United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in Article 19, is very clear. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. And this right includes freedom to hold opinion without interference and seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media. So, and the second one is the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. in Article 11. Everyone has the right to freedom of expression, and this right shall include freedom to have opinion and to receive and impart information and ideas. In Spain and in other countries, well, if you tune some TV set, some TV station, radio station, some newspapers, you will listen the same message, the same message. So this is, unfortunately, is very bad for the market economy. We must fight this. It's completely illegal. So it's very important, and mainly in those countries where the government is a coalition of socialists and communists. They don't want free information, and they subsidize the media, and also they provide commercials and at selected levels. So this is important, in my opinion, that we have to take into consideration when we talk about, and we have to spread the idea of the market economy, and they have to respect the rules and regulations. So usually the most common violations is the control of the media, the censorship. Usually it happens every day. Sometimes we don't realize. Also the administrative legislation. Do you remember during the COVID what has happened in Spain? Well, the parliament was closed. So it's the government. It was Pedro Sánchez, the socialist Pedro Sánchez, who decided. So we were in our homes. We couldn't decide. And they adopt a lot of rules and regulations, and even at the level of the European Commission. Do you remember all these agreements that they showed to us, all of us, and was higher, and what were the prices and what were the conditions? So that's why the New York Times, the newspaper, sued the European Commission before the court of the European Union, because it's necessary to know, according to Article 20 of the previous regulation I showed in the previous slide, that everyone has the right to know the information. All of us, we can address to the European Commission, and we must receive what are the conditions too. And they didn't. Well, they show us, of course, but everything was hidden, so nobody could understand anything. So this is really what I really wanted to show you very quickly. And what are the conclusions of the presentation and all these points that I tackle here. And later on, well, if you are interested, we can discuss about it, and we can deep inside about this. And mainly because, well, some situation will not change if we don't do with our work the necessary steps to fight all this kind of government that what they really want to do is to manage, to ignore that they still try to defend the Keynesian economy and to have the control of the economy, and this is very, very, very negative. So remember, if, well, I will not repeat, you can read here, but I will summarize just with a sentence, that the worst dictatorship is a false democracy. So, and only market economy can survive with democracy. That's why we have to fight. Well, the European Union, the Commission, or the institutions in general, they are not entitled to order member states what to do in all activities. No, it's the delegation. The delegation of sovereignty is not complete. Is not completed. So Brussels cannot deal with any topic of all member states. So I hope that, well, this can be the starting point later to discuss, and, well, I would like to answer your questions if I know the answers, of course. So thank you very much for your kind attention.
Everyone knows I like to walk. Before this starts, two things. There's so many interesting topics. I'm really sad I can't be on all the panels. I will start this lecture on a personal note. It used to be that I was a quite welcomed guest here at the Danube Institute, but it is no longer the case. I'm no longer a welcomed guest. I have been deeply honored by Madam and Mr. O'Sullivan to become a non-resident fellow. And my new boss is now David Jones, so we're going to be doing a lot of academic stuff. Therefore, the only thing I can tell to all of you people is, what are you all doing in my living room? So, considering this is my second home now. Laser. Okay, is this on? Let's do some economics. So let's do really basic, simple questions. What is inflation? Now, inflation is a growth of index over time. Now, usually there are multiple of these indices. The most popular one is Producer's Price Index, which is basically what you people call inflation. You know, when it's on TV, inflation that's the number you see. Then you have, that's Consumer's Price Index. The Producer's Price Index is inflation for companies. So if a company needs to buy some goods, is that rising or falling? Then this is the main thing, right? What does inflation tell us about the state of the economy? And the answer is it tells us everything. Not if you look at one number, but if you look at inflation over several decades, you can see a clear picture of what is going on in an economy and how it functions. And this is basically what we're going to be doing for the most part, and looking at this. So not at these two things, right? Because if you look at the inflation over a short period of time, you have all sorts of economic shock. You know, inflation, oil prices go up, inflation goes up for a couple of months. You have a bad harvest, inflation goes up for a couple of months. But if we really, really look into the inflation over a long period of time, we get the picture of what is the structure of the economy. Now, how do we know that we get a picture of the structure of the economy? Well, the answer to that is, do we have or do we not have inflation? Now, think about it. If you have what we have had over a really long period of time, for the last 30 years here, is very low or almost no inflation. Now, why do we have some inflation? It's called, in economics, it's called frictions. You have to have this. For example, let's say you have some kind of an innovation. Someone comes up and increases productivity. What initially does is you have a loss of jobs, and then you have completely new technology that gives you to produce more. And again, the simplest basic explanation is a tractor. So you have 100 people digging on a farm, you know, farming land. All of a sudden you have a tractor, you don't need those 99 people anymore. But now that you do have a tractor, you need a factory to produce tractors. And these kinds of things happen throughout the sectors of the economy all the time. So you have to have some kind of inflation. And here, if you look at the Fed preferred PC index, it's basically, you know, from the mid-80s, it's around under 2.5%. Now, what is stuff like this? Right? Stuff like this is you had a rise in price of commodities, and then you had a great financial crisis. But if you look at the time, it's a drop in the ocean, right? This is, you know, 2006, 2010, 11. So back to normal. So there was some kind of a shock, but the shock was smoothed out. Well, what we want to know is these two things. This one and this one. So what was this one? It was the 70s. And everything was going wrong. You had an especially expansive monetary policy that financed all sorts of things. You had a removal of gold standard. You had a price of oil going from $2 to $10 to $20. You had political instabilities, weak governments, insurrections. So you can clearly see that this structure of the economy doesn't resemble remotely this structure of the economy. But I said there are two things we want to pay attention to. What's the second thing? Well, this is the second thing. This here is the second thing. This here basically tells you there's something going on. There's something changing in the structure of the economy as we know it. Now, let's give another 2 minutes to the world before. Because the answer to the world, how it's going to be, it's going to be simple, because it's going to be completely opposite from everything we had up to now. So what did we have up to now? You had an impossibly good economic equilibrium. This was the best of times. You had, and this is, we're going to break down the price index into goods and services without housing. So what is happening with a price of goods? And I don't have all the data, so when I run into something, I just take it, and here there's a source here. I don't have it from 2000, but it doesn't matter. You see the picture. The price of goods is negative, meaning your goods are becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Why? Because of China. Now, why is this good on both ways? Well, it's good for China because it's opening new jobs, creating higher level of standard for Chinese. Why is it good for us? Well, it's good for us because we're getting cheaper goods. But if we aren't producing anything, which was often remarked in the United States, Levi's is no longer produced in the United States, how is it possible to have a rise in employment? Well, because you have services. Now look at the service inflation. It's positive, which means the price of service goods is going up. Now, why is the price of service goods going up? Because you can pay more and more money for more and more labor. So you have substituted your production for services, thereby creating a cheaper goods and higher standard for everyone with more jobs. And everyone was benefited from this. Chinese clearly, China had 400 kilometers of highways in 1970s. Now they have over 50,000 kilometers of highways. Someone built that. What happened in the United States or in Europe, you have a growth in employment, you have a growth in standard of living. That's the structure of the economy. Well, what do you have here? The structure broke. Why did the structure break? Because we do no longer live in the world which started in 1980 and ended in 21. We now live in a completely different structure of the world, and not the one resembling 70s. You know why? Trick question. Which country produced almost 40% of global goods in 1974? Anyone? The Americans? United States. Well, the scales today are not even remotely to those levels. You have United States producing 20-25%, and you have China producing 16 to 20%. So the global power has shifted both politically, economically, and militarily. So we now live in a different world. So what did we have thus far? Globalization kept prices of goods down, wages, real economy, and employment were growing. Again, someone might say, but what about great financial crisis? Well, what about it? It was 3 years, but look at a span of 40 years. We're looking at 40 years. We're not looking at 3 years. What's the new world? Well, it's exactly the opposite. We have moved from low, non-existent inflation, which reflected the structural change of the world, to a more elevated inflation. Why? Because China doesn't want to produce your goods anymore. It wants to produce its own goods anymore. Think about the following question. If someone, anyone, told you 10 years ago you would have a Chinese cell phone, you would start laughing. Again, a trick question. Who has the fastest growing production and development of electric cars? It's again, China. Who's making most technological advances? In top 4 banks in terms of size globally, top 4 are from which country? And if you look at the list of universities, all of a sudden in top 20, you have 2 Chinese. So China can legitimately say it has become an educational powerhouse of the world. So inflation is going to remain elevated because it'll reflect a new structure of the economy. The main cause of inflation will come from the supply side. Why? Because Europe cannot produce the goods it needs. And you can't basically move a factory in a span of 15 minutes. It takes a really long time to get all the licenses, build it, hire workers, and create a new plant for anything. Interest rates will have to remain elevated, and standard of living will decrease. Now, where's the best part in this? Well, this is not so smart so far. I've basically told you pretty much stuff you can Google and find out. Nothing new. What we're going to talk is not about this, because this will not happen. This is what policy response should be. You should have a decrease in political tension. And what do we learn from my previous, not learn, but we're again, for the 50th time, informed that Hungary and Poland are being put under subjugated status in European Union. So you should decrease political tensions. You should increase investments targeted where you're weak. Move back production onshore, deglobalize. Targeted credit policy by the banks and accommodated monetary policy. Meaning the banks have to be, regulation has to be created so that banks will be incentivized to make more money on these kinds of things. Of course, do I need to say this? And simplify cross-border procedures. And here comes the innovative part. This will not happen. You will have an increase in political intentions. What did I say the last time I was here? I told you there's a financial civil war between Germany and France. And you see how Macron behaves last couple of months. You see what's going on inside of Europe. So, was right on that one. Sorry. Outlier countries will be brought to heel. For those of you that lack knowledge of American expressions, being brought to heel, you bring a dog to kneel next to you. So that's the push with Hungary and Poland by taking away their money. ECB will conduct a restrictive monetary policy. They have already taken out a trillion euros. They're going to take another 500 billion in the next 3 months. Regulation will be increased and centralized. You're now hearing stuff which will be an introduction to the bad things. You're hearing words like, you know, if we centralize this, we can do it more efficiently. That might make sense with armament for Ukraine. But what about, let's centralize energy. Let's centralize food. Let's centralize education. You see how, you know, it's kind of a college thing. one bad idea leads to another. And there will be more and more regulation. I have decided to buy an office space. The loan procedure had 17 forms. On each form, there were exactly the same 7 pieces of data. Name of the company, number of the company, address of the company, ownership of the company. Well, now, I will tell you the best part. How do I know that I'm right? Because, as my favorite t-shirt says, and I have that t-shirt, been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. Yeah, I actually have that t-shirt. It's the greatest t-shirt. It's my favorite American saying. It has already happened. Everything that will happen in the European Union has already happened. And it happened in Yugoslavia. As my predecessor rightly pointed out, and as Mr. O'Sullivan pointed out the first, at the end of the 70s, you have a structural breakdown of socialistic countries. And you have 3 separate sets of decisions. You have an Eastern Bloc that, because of ideological reasons, couldn't move away from socialism. And we know how that went. Everything fell apart. You have China, which says the most important sentence in their history: capitalism, yes; democracy, no. So they move out of that and become what they are today. And you have Yugoslavia, which actually had a free market economy. It wasn't centrally planned. You had companies that were competing among each other. But then, in the 80s, they decided to become more and more centralized. And over time, gradually, system falls apart. And we know what happened. So these guys, you have a peaceful breakup and move towards free market economies. Well, the peaceful breakup is now questionable considering the war in Ukraine. Well, Chinese want to rule the world. That's where they are right now. And what happened in Yugoslavia? You had war. And if you look at the 80s in Yugoslavia, you see people that recognize a problem. You see people that say, okay, there's something going on. We have a structural change. We need to adapt to that structural change. We need to change our economy. But you have politicians that take over. And as time progresses from 80 to 89, you have more and more central planning, more and more political influence, more and more something being delegated from one center of power. And there's a guy who wrote a book about it, actual several books of them. He's the guy who wrote about what inflation is and what it does to the economy over time. His name is Marijan Korosic. And if you read his books from 70s and 80s and substitute the word Yugoslavia for European Union, there are amazing parallels. And this is the 2 sentences he said. Free markets are the arch enemy of government bureaucracy. Because government bureaucracy, as an entity, as a living entity, only wants to grow and increase its power. And this is what you're seeing in Europe for the last 10 years, especially the last 2 or 3 years. And this is exactly the play you had in Yugoslavia. I'm tempted to translate one chapter of his 1986 book, which is titled Inflation in Yugoslavia, and just remove the words Yugoslavia and put European Union. And you will see amazing connections. How you have the politicians subjugating economics as a science and saying things like, well, in this case, rules and laws of economics, they don't function. We need something better. And you see it at all levels of existence. I mean, I'm talking about free markets. What did my predecessor talk about? Property rights. You know, it doesn't matter if someone moves into your house. I mean, it makes for us a better world. It doesn't matter if your child doesn't want to listen to you, the state can just take him and educate him better. Where's the line? Where's the line we will not allow to be crossed? But there's hope yet. The hope lies in the second sentence. Sooner or later, market instabilities create political instabilities. And this is what happened in Yugoslavia. And if you look at the progress of dissolution of Yugoslavia, it didn't start in late 80s. It started in early 80s, where one thing led to another, and then you have a violent breakup. This is exactly the same thing that will happen to Europe because it's on this trajectory. You will have changes in a global economy. You will have politicians who will try to maintain power without adjusting to the new economy. You will have more and more concentration of the power, and you will have political instability. Now, when I say political instability, I don't actually mean political instability. What I mean is democracy at work. What Brussels politicians tell you is political instability. Because when a pro-European candidate wins, that's a sign of a true democracy. But clearly, elections in Finland were rigged. Also elections in Sweden, not to mention Italy. And I'm not going to talk about Hungarian, which is clearly run by a fascist dictator. You see how this goes? If you have a one-sided politics where candidates which are obedient to the central power are good candidates, and any candidate that wants to change the system and bring something new is labeled as a fascist dictator, as you have here in Hungary, then there's something wrong. And you have a huge political instability in Europe because you cannot label democracy. And we have seen that. We have seen that parties, what would be considered centrist parties, are now being labeled as extreme right-wing parties. And we're seeing that when you have elections and a candidate wins, he's labeled by a central power as a dictator. What's wrong with Orban? Have people elected him? How's he bad, but Macron is good? And when Macron says, I'm going to bring a law into effect because I want to, and bypass his parliament, that's his constitutional right. You see how the system works with the foundation of hypocrisy? So the political instability will be caused by economic instability, but it will start from a center. It will not start in countries like this. It will start in the center of the European Union. Because, I don't know who said, you can fool some people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. So, this is why the Free Market Roadshow is so important. Because this is what it's all about. You have to have a freedom to avoid this. And the only way to fight bureaucracy, central planning, and dictatorship, true dictatorship, from Brussels is with this. There's no other way. So, I will part you with one of my favorite sayings. I think it was by an American president, I forget which one. All it takes for an evil to win is for good people to do nothing. Considering we are all here doing something, I would say they don't stand a chance. Thank you.